Hey there, listeners. Jeff Hutton here on The Level. Bit of an abbreviated podcast this week during the Eid holidays following Ramadan. I wanted to bring you up to speed on a new edition for the pod, though. We're going to experiment with a regular roundup of news from the region. Now, that's new because there's not a lot of podcasts that do that. There's some great print coverage out there. I'm thinking the Asian Times, the New Narrative, New Mandela, and my own newspaper, of course, the Singapore Straits Times. But not a lot of podcasts. And that's strange because this place is huge. And I'm talking about ASEAN, Southeast Asia, Asia in general. Massive. ASEAN would be the fourth biggest economy right after Japan. And this place is very young too. The median age is 29. In the US, it's just under 41. And here's one other thing too you probably wouldn't associate with Asia, at least outside of China. It's spending big on its military too. In his book earlier this year, Indo-Pacific Empire, Rory Metcalf said, India, Australia, Indonesia, and Japan spent a combined $147 billion on defense in 2018. By comparison, China says it spends $250 billion. That's if we can believe that data, and that's not always the case. So there's a big blind spot when it comes to Asia, especially Southeast Asia. And that's why from time to time, we're going to be turning to Erin Cook. She's the author of Dari Mulut, Indonesian for word of mouth. It's a weekly newsletter, news and analysis from the region. Erin joined me last week from Canberra, where she's waiting out the COVID-19 epidemic. We discussed endangered press freedoms in the Philippines, Malaysia's looming vote of confidence, and Thailand's fragile economy at a time when COVID-19 has kept tourists away. Hope you like it. So, Erin, thank you so much for joining me. This is great. I'm so happy that you could find the time. Can we start a little...
I'm thrilled you invited me.
Oh, God, of course. Can you tell me tell us about the newsletter? The Dari Mulut, what does that mean? Dari Mulut, what does that mean? And why did you start it? And what's the focus?
Okay, sure. So it translates directly from Indonesian to English as from mouth to mouth, but is probably more akin to word of mouth gossip, that sort of thing. Right. Which I don't know, it's kind of a good way of putting a lot of the coverage it looks at. So it covers all of Southeast Asia, including Timor-Leste, and just takes a look at the developments there, as well as the best analysis and some of the fantastic features that comes out of the region. So right now, of course, it's very coronavirus related, but over the years, it's covered elections, natural disasters, developments kind of between countries and through ASEAN, kind of just whatever's happening in the region, it'll find its way into the newsletter eventually.
Why did you feel the need to start a newsletter on Southeast Asia?
That's an interesting question. At the time, so I started it in early 2017, and at that time I was working for the Jakarta Globe, which, as you know, is one of the English language papers there in Jakarta. And I'm Australian, so I felt like I had not a great understanding of Indonesia, but I was getting across it quite easily. But through working at the Globe, I'd see that there'd be these stories about Indonesia and how Indonesia kind of interacts with other countries in the neighbourhood. And I realised I had no idea about Malaysia. I had no idea about even Singapore, which is the most well-known outside of the region. And it was really difficult to go to one spot to get across that. I could go to South China Morning Post and read all about the Chinese diaspora across the region.
Yeah, they tend to be kind of China heavy. Yeah.
Or I could go to, exactly. Or I could go to, some of the great publications in Malaysia and Singapore, but they would only look at Malaysia and Singapore. So to find like a one-stop spot that covered everything, or at least generally covered everything. And I was trying to, make a bit of a name, make it a bit of a career for myself. So just thought, hell, why not?
Well, I'm glad you did. And one of the recurring stars in your coverage is our friend Duterte. He is acting badly again. Can you fill us in on that?
Yes, he is in there pretty much every week. This week, he's been having a bit of a crazy time with the coronavirus pandemic. Of course, virtually from the start, he's been having a bit of a crazy one, and that seems to have been putting him on edge. As across the region, we're seeing a lot of countries, a lot of communities getting a bit annoyed with the leadership and their response. But of course, in the Philippines, going after Duterte kind of will turn that person then into a target. So he's at war at the moment with a 25-year-old teacher. And this teacher probably did not too smart of a thing by posting to Twitter, having a bit of a rant about Duterte, but then offering a bounty for somebody to kill the president, which does not go down well anywhere, but definitely not with Duterte. So that's really, he's since been arrested and he's looking at charges of sedition. At the start of the week, he hadn't been charged yet, but I'm not too sure if there's an update today. So he's looking at pretty heavy charges. It's been quite a divisive development because there's a bit of a, this is a bit of a draconian overreach response from the government, or what role does the media have here, where the Supreme Court's saying, some of the stuff that this guy said to the media, to the mainstream media too, not to his own social media accounts, will now be admissible in any future charges. The Philippines has a bit of a habit of letting suspects and kind of people of interest speak quite freely to the media. Be interesting to see if this in the long term has any sort of impact on that habit. But for now, this poor bloke's in a world of trouble.
They do have an established free press, but hasn't he just shut down a television network?
Yeah, so ABS-CBN, which is the longest running television network, which is something they always say in media reports, but then I looked into it and it's very long running. And it's one of those ones that has a legacy of kind of being targeted, particularly under Marcos, as well, as you can imagine. So the Philippines still certainly freer than many of the other countries in the region, but that is falling very quickly and very suddenly under Duterte. The ABS-CBN case, I think, will continue for a bit longer. So there are efforts to kind of reverse the decisions that were made there. But that'll be a long burn, I think.
But just after they also shut down Rappler too, so the free press is really under siege there. So is Duterte sort of a cut of the same cloth of, say, Trump and Bolsonaro in Brazil, would you say?
Yeah, I would say that Duterte and Bolsonaro are on one level that Trump is aspiring to get to. I think a lot of the things that we've seen Duterte do are things that, some of these more infamous world leaders would love to be able to do. Duterte came in and was just, went straight for Rappler. Some of the rumours about, I'm not sure it's even a rumour, it's kind of talked about as fact, is that he targeted ABS-CBN because they took money for advertising during the presidential campaign, which is very common, of course, like television ads, you got to pay, and then didn't run the ad and then refused to pay him back. I suspect there's probably a bit more to it than that we haven't heard about, but the implication there is that he's like pretty petty and vindictive towards the media.
What's his response been to COVID-19? Did he take it seriously?
The Philippines had the first death outside of China, which forced it to be taken. It wasn't being taken all that seriously, and then very quickly it became very serious. And then, of course, was subject to Duterte's insane overreach. His government brought in, I think it's probably one of the world's most restrictive measures. People were not allowed to leave their street for weeks in some places. And he's also repeatedly threatened martial law, which he does at the best of times. So here now it's becoming a real serious possibility. But I think largely the Philippines has been testing more than Indonesia, and I think as well more than Malaysia. So in terms of testing, it seems to be quite on it. And of course, most of the world's healthcare workers, nurses and things like that are from the Philippines. So a lot of people who would have gone to work in the UK or the US have stayed, been forced to stay and work on it there in the Philippines.
Been forced to stay because of the travel bans, or because the government isn't letting them go, or both?
This is an interesting thing. Both. It was both. It was framed as the Bureau Directorate of Immigration will not let you leave. You have to stay here and work. And then it became a bit of a rights issue. It's like, well, I can't stay here. I have a job in Bristol that I've got to go to. And then, of course, the worldwide travel bans came in and kind of died down very quickly. But there's been some brilliant reporting on that, particularly out of the US, which relies quite heavily on Filipino women nurses for its healthcare system. There's been some excellent reporting in the LA Times, especially about that.
But their migrant workers are key to several big segments, not also shipping. Their crew, they crew container ships and the like, cruise ships as well, domestic help. If they're all staying home, right? But if they're all staying home, they're not sending their remittances back, right? That must be a huge hit.
That's huge. Remittance is something crazy, like 20% or something of the annual income for the Philippines. So I think that is going to become a bigger problem further down the line. Like in the next couple of months, that's going to be a huge problem.
Right. Okay, back.
But you're right about the cruises as well. I just want to mention this quickly because I think this is a story the rest of the world paid a lot of attention to. This sort of like floating cruise ships of corona death across the world. There's dozens of these cruise ships now that are in the Bay of Manila with predominantly Filipino crew workers, and they're just stranded on these cruise ships still, but the news cycle's kind of moved on from them, which is really scary.
The cruise ships are marooned in the bay.
Yeah, so the big one here in Australia, the Ruby Princess, that one went straight to Manila, and that's, just sitting in Bay of Manila alongside a couple of others. Well, a handful of others, yeah.
Because nobody knows what to do with the potentially exposed crew?
Yes, yeah. There's from what I understand, there's healthcare workers coming on to test. It's better to have them out there on the ocean and not worry about it for now, which is not a great way to.
I just thought that didn't really bear out in the reporting of the various cruise ships that we've been seeing. The Ruby Princess down in Australia. There was also another cruise ship off of Japan. We heard a lot about the Western tourists. Maybe some of the rich Asian tourists, and we didn't hear a thing about the Filipinos or the Indonesians or the other Asian crew who can live two to a room, and they are the ones taking the food to the passengers.
You're exactly right.
Wow.
Like they're probably like more than any other, I don't know, guest. What do they call them? I don't know, guest.
Yeah. Well, let's swing down to Malaysia. Ramadan is wrapping up, and we have a potentially a vote of confidence or non-confidence.
I don't know how common this is. We've done it here in Australia as well, where Malaysia has kind of its parliament's not sitting like it usually does. So it sat on Monday, and it will not sit again until July. And at this stage, whether that gets pushed back, who knows? But at this stage in July, and once that July sitting opens, the resigned former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad will be making his comeback. So he's moved a motion of no confidence against the Prime Minister. I don't know. I think it's going to be a funny one. He doesn't have like the full... it seems very divisive. I'm not convinced he'll make enough numbers to get across the line.
But he resigned, didn't he?
Yeah, I don't know. That whole thing is still very complicated and murky to me. I think it's unfortunate that the pandemic really started to hit Malaysia effectively like the next week, because that should have been constructed a lot deeper than it was able to be. And God bless the Malaysian journalists, because that's a hell of a lot of work. Yes, so he resigned. He now says that the king had kind of strong-armed him into it. Kings famously are not huge fans of Mahathir, but Mahathir does not seem like a man who can be strong-armed. So I think there's a bit more to come out about how he ended up resigning and why he did. And, yeah, I don't think that'll be coming back until Parliament starts sitting again.
He's 94?
Yes, so he's 95 in July. Like, once Parliament sits again, he'll be 95. Like,
and he's still hanging on. What about his faithful number 2, Anwar?
Poor Anwar. I think from what I understand, that they've kind of teamed up again for this vote of no confidence. I think Anwar will again be very, very hesitant of trusting Mahathir, which would mean that if Mahathir is then put back into power, that kind of alliance will be a really, really interesting one to watch. I don't think that guarantees kind of a straight line back for Anwar at all.
So the current Prime Minister, Yashing is his name?
Yes, this is the thing. It all happens so quickly. His name doesn't even stick in your brain just yet. Of course, for Malaysians who have known him him and his work with UMNO for a very long time, of course, that's a different thing. But for us foreigners, it's a bit like, whoa, who is this guy? Where did he come from?
But he has, if the king is thought to have intervened and strung out and forced Mahathir's resignation, that sort of suggests that the current prime minister doesn't have a mandate, and so the government is sort of in abeyance in the middle of a pandemic, and we're not going to get any sort of resolution until maybe sometime in July, if that. So the country seems to be in a suspended animation then.
Yeah, that's an excellent way to put it. There's polling recently that showed the spokesman for the COVID-19 task force is by margins the most popular leader in the country at the moment. And it just goes to show that the focus for Malaysia isn't on all this ridiculous Putrajaya drama. It's still on getting the country out of its lockdown and kind of back on its feet so it doesn't have to worry about all this stuff anymore.
Right. Protect us. A little less soap opera, a little more soap.
Yes, exactly.
A little less soap opera, more soap.
Oh, that's a cracking line.
Maybe something like that. You had a piece in there about Lau Lau and Laos, where whiskey, where whiskey can double as hand sanitizer. Anyone who knows anything about traveling a bit in China knows that there are these regional whiskeys and distilled spirits, if that's what you want to call them, that just... I've seen... I forget what it's called in China, but you can take this Maoju or something like that, and you can actually wipe down tables with it. And that's what we got here in Laos. You said 120 or 150 proof? Tell us about that.
Frightening to think. So this story comes from the kind of anonymous writer that we have there based in Laos. And he was seeing that the kind of ubiquitous hanging out, drinking Lao nights have died off, of course, with the lockdown, but there was no Lao available. And he was seeing that, or hearing that with hand sanitizer kind of stocks running low, people were starting to use Lao instead. And then he got in touch with a distillery based in the US who his family's from Laos, and he's always, the owner of this distillery has always loved Lao. So he went into business making his own rice whiskies and gins and all these sorts of interesting things. But has then used his kind of setup to be able to make his own hand sanitizer for first responders there in Maryland, which I thought was amazing. So, yeah, he's passed it now that it's kind of relaxing a little bit, but initially it was like going straight to fireys, ambulances, all that sort of thing. So,
best use for it. So from your view there, 30,000 feet, how is the coronavirus progressing or not in the region? Are there standouts for good or bad?
Yeah, of course, the last few weeks has been great news out of Vietnam, which is been celebrated across the world for essentially getting it completely under control. I think the next one's going to be Thailand. So Thailand, of course, has been dealing with this longer than anyone except for China, after the first to identify cases outside of China. But last week, Thailand had 2 days where within 24-hour periods, no new cases were identified. So I think Thailand, of course, had a bit of a, like Vietnam, a bit of a easy way of introducing some more of the heavy-handed measures, given kind of the way the country operates. But it's done.
Wait a minute. How so? How was it? How was it? Took an easier approach, or it had the resources and the skills?
It has the resources, resources to just be able to say, we're the government and we're doing this right now, and you're going along with it. Right. So when it became obvious that people were starting to leave the cities, like we've seen in Jakarta, where people who are running out of work, particularly in tourism and things like that, with all those industries drying up, people were fleeing back to the provinces, and the government came into that very quickly and said, we're shutting it down. There was very little kind of movement within the country. There's quite a bit out of the country. So a lot of those migrant workers from elsewhere in the Mekong, that's a different story, but within the country, some of these measures seem to have had some real success. 2 days without new cases is really promising.
Opened up the shopping malls and allowing some domestic tourism happening there. That's going to be incredibly important for Thailand.
It will be. Thailand, it's been very scary. The economic story there seems to be quite worse than elsewhere in the region. Like the Thai economy's been really struggling to begin with. So I've been reading a lot of stories about like increases in suicide rates and things like that, which like completely linked to losing work, losing income, overwhelmed by debt, those sorts of horrible stories. So hopefully with the lever relieved a little bit, we'll start seeing a bit of an impact on that as well.
Yeah, it was already on hard times before the pandemic hit. The economy was slowing, and the baht inexplicably was rising and making it tougher to attract holiday makers.
That's it. Like tourism, really started dropping off. Like, I don't know. I think the story seems like we feel the story begins in January, but it was much sooner for Thailand. It was last year, the year before that, tourism seemed dropping. So.
Well, Thailand has a special place in my heart. I hope that they are able to sort it out. Erin, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to make this a regular chat.
Yes, please.
Dari Mulut, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's our pod. Thanks so much to Erin Cook from Dari Mulut. Stephen Handoko is the producer. We'll be back next week after the Eid holidays with a full slate of On the Level. I'm Jeff Hutton. Bye for now.